Anyway, thanks for making it in today, and a special thank you goes out to Dr. Dave Anderson, who's going to come and chat with us, share some aspects of his research. It's a highlight of my year, because quite frankly, I get to see all the stuff that you guys are familiar with applied in a research model, things that I can follow at my level, and guess what? You guys can definitely follow all this as well. I think it's a very good talk. It's a very engaging talk. It is also an interactive talk, so there are times where he will ask some questions. You are expected to answer because you can definitely handle the questions. So make that happen. And with the offering conditioning with the Vince here, I'll take care of that, and thank you. And without further ado, I give you Dr. Dave Anderson.
What's the end time?
Oh, the end time here is going to be on that clock, 41, 42, something like that.
Okay. All right, great. And is the sound okay with the microphone? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Good? Okay, great. Nice to see you all. I'm Dave Anderson. I'm from the biology department at Wake Forest. Wake Forest is a research university. The faculty have teaching mission and they have a research mission. And on the research side, I've been working for 33 years on the evolution of reproductive characteristics in a seabird. This seabird right here lives in the Galapagos Islands. It's got the funny name, Nazca Boobie. I've been working on boobies for 33 years, so I feel like I can go ahead and say the word boobie as much as I want, but it may be a little bit unfamiliar to you, so I often just keep on saying boobie at the beginning of a talk so that you hear the word boobie a lot, and you become a little desensitized to it. I own the word. I can wear a shirt like this. I don't wear it to the mall, but I'll wear it for a situation like this. So have I said the word boobie enough that we're all good? Okay, probably not, but I'm going to go ahead anyway. Our interest is in the evolution of reproduction. How fast do they breed? What behaviors are involved in breeding? And these birds are unusual in some respects in their breeding biology. For one thing, they have a really long reproductive lifespan. They live a very long time. They're about the weight of a small cat, 5 pounds or so. A small cat is not going to live 27 years, but these guys do live 27 years. Now, birds in general live a long time compared to mammals of the same body size, but these guys are very special in their longevity. Now, we know how long they live because we put marks on them and follow them their whole life. This is a family, mom, dad, fluffy baby. All of them have leg bands on that have numbers. And I brought some of these along in case you've never seen a bird band before. It's got a big 5-digit number, which is the name that we call them. They probably have their own name, but this is what we call them. And my email address, which is super short, da@wfu.edu, one of the shortest on the interwebs. And the reason for that is that I don't have much space to put it on the band. And it's on the band, so when people find my birds in unexpected places, they send me emails. And I get emails all the time. I found your duck. I said, well, it wasn't a duck, but thanks. Where'd you find it, and what were the circumstances? They're unusual in their lifespan. They're also unusual in the rate at which they reproduce. They only raise a maximum of 1 offspring every reproductive bout. So once a year they have a breeding season, and they lay some eggs at the beginning, and if one of those eggs hatches, then they have a nestling, and the most they're ever going to produce at the end of that annual breeding season is 1. Well, you can't get too much lower than 1, right? Less than 1 is 0, and you're extinct. So this is the lowest, pretty much, reproductive rate that you can have. We would like to know how long life, slow reproductive rate, and some other things all go together to perform, to produce a high-performing phenotype. We're operating in the tradition of the evolutionary biologist Charles Darwin, who also was interested in phenotypic variation within populations and how some variants perform better than others and are rewarded by natural selection. Darwin got his inspiration in the same place that I work, the Galapagos Islands, and Darwin was working on things like tortoises and finches. And you'll remember from when you talked about evolution that Darwin's insight was that he saw phenotypic variation, I can use the word phenotype, right? Phenotypic variation within populations, across populations, that was not expected. And he proposed that some variants within that distribution of phenotypes are going to do better than others. Doing better means having more offspring. And if the favorable characteristics that the successful ones have can be passed to their offspring, offspring resemble parents, then the ones who are successful have lots of babies who have those traits, and those favorable traits become frequent in coming generations. That was his model, and that's the model that we're working on also. The place that we work is the Galapagos Islands here in the Pacific Ocean, 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Ecuador, a set of volcanic islands that have never been connected to the mainland. If we zoom in a little bit, we see the 13 main islands of the archipelago, and the one that I work on is in the southeast corner. It's called Isla Española, and we work on the southeast corner of the southeast corner, a place called Punta Ceballos. This is our study site. There's our camp. There's no one else on this island except us. This is in the Galapagos National Park. There aren't people living on the island, so we arrive in a big boat with all of our water and food and camping equipment and stuff. And each of those little white spots is a tent site. There's our beach where we swim and bathe. Here are the birds, all along the coastline here for about 2 kilometers. All that white is bird poop, and the birds themselves are white, so that's where they live. That's the breeding colony. We go every year, October, which is the beginning of their breeding season. We look for all the banded birds. At any one time, there's going to be about 5,000 banded birds there, total of 10,000. About half of them are our birds. And we keep on monitoring them till the end of the breeding season in May. So we're just wrapping up right now, as a matter of fact. And the idea is to compile really comprehensive life histories of everything that these birds do in reproduction and anything that might be involved in their reproduction. At the end of their life, we try to figure out what traits have caused some of them to be successful over their lifespans more so than others. And I have a little video clip here that will show you what the colony is like and also make me seem like a cowboy. The BBC was with us 2 years ago and made this little clip.
Lying in the east of the archipelago is Española, the oldest island in the chain, and home to one of the longest-running scientific studies in Galapagos.
You said 42, right? Yeah. Sound okay? Yeah.
Like the majority of Galapagos wildlife, rolling away from terrestrial predators has left these birds fearless, perfect subjects of scientific observation.
I'm going to try to take this egg away. Usually, the bird pretty much lets me do it without leaving the nest.
It's this species' bizarre reproductive strategy that has intrigued them. And to unravel its secrets, he's observed thousands of birds across their entire lives.
This is the beginning of compiling a history of the bird that's inside the egg from the time it was conceived. It was conceived just a few days ago. It was laid yesterday. It may live 26 years. We'll be following it the entire time. Now we'll give the bird its eggs back.
In a few days, this bird will lay another egg, as Nazca Boobies always lay two. But the intriguing conundrum with these birds is that they only ever raise one chick. And Dave wanted to understand why. Every October, over 10,000 pairs of Nazca Boobies return to Punta Ceballos on Española to breed. And as soon as the males arrive, they go through age-old rituals. Priority number 1, find a mate.
Nazca Boobie males have one main job, and that is to attract a female. They need a nest site to do that, and they need a female to start a family. They have a big problem. The problem is an excess of males.
females.
And for neighbouring males, the competition is especially intense.
A male over here is doing a classic bit of male behavior. It's called sky pointing, which is looking at the sky, whistling very loudly, directing that at a female, advertising the fact that he's available to the female.
He also has to prove his housekeeping skills. Males are meticulous about making the perfect nest. But with a limited supply of stones, tactics often get underhand. Especially when a nest goes unguarded. The neighbour is none the wiser.
You can see the same pebble traveling back and forth repeatedly, probably over the centuries, as different occupants of these nests keep on stealing from one another. You can't just sit here all the time. You got to eat once in a while, and when you do that, your pebbles disappear.
And the thief gets the girl. Every season, many of the males go unrewarded. Only the fittest ones get to mate. And have a chance of raising a family. And it's then that the real dark side of Nazca Boobie behaviour emerges.
We've been following this nest, and first saw one egg laid, then about 5 days go by, and a second egg was laid. This male and his mate are going to incubate these 2 eggs for around 44 days. If both eggs hatch, only one of them is going to survive. Although they lay 2 eggs, they never raise more than 1 chick.
This is the most surprising aspect of their biology that Dave has discovered. If both eggs hatch, the moment the youngest hatchling emerges, its life is in danger. The oldest chick always overpowers the smaller chick, throwing it from the nest even under the watchful eyes of its parents. Once out of the nest, it's on its own, at the mercy of many hungry mouths. But why would these birds bother laying 2 eggs if one always succumbs?
This unusual bit.
That was some aggressive behavior, wasn't it? That was a fight to the death, a cage match. Only one of them survives. And this is super common in this population. About a third of the reproductive attempts end up producing 2 chicks, and whenever 2 chicks are produced, they're going to fight to the death. So when you look at the adult population, about a third of them have gone through this fight to the death thing. So that's an aspect of extreme aggression. These birds have a lot of aggression in general. Adults fight as well. This is a case of male who's been on his nest site, guarding his little pebbles, and another pair, a male and a female, decided they wanted to take it over, and he's trying to fight them off, but he's probably going to lose because he can't fight successfully against 2 of them. This kind of behavior, adult on adult aggression, is common in birds. They're not unusual in that respect. The nestling aggression is uncommon. It's unusual. It's unexpected. You see nestlings fighting in some other bird species, but it's usually in the context of we had N nestlings, and then the food supply went south halfway through the reproductive bout, and we don't have enough food for N nestlings, so we got to adjust demand to supply, and the fighting among the nestlings causes that to happen. So that's not uncommon. But this is not conditional on the environment at all. It's not conditional on the food. They're just going to kill each other no matter what. Parents don't interrupt it. You would think natural selection might reward parents for trying to raise 2 nestlings, but apparently they're on board with what the older nestling is doing. So I wonder if you can come up with a hypothesis for how natural selection might be favoring the production of this second egg when it's not going to result in 2 offspring being produced at the end. What can you get out of that second egg if you're not going to allow the second chick to survive? They have some predators, but they're pretty much just on a nestling that has been displaced. If a nestling or egg is being guarded by an adult, there's no effective predator. And no predator can take the adults at all. So it's probably not a predator-mediated thing. What could be good about having an egg that's not going to increase the number of chicks that you have?
The nestling that survives, would it be stronger than the other one?
So you're suggesting that there might be a difference in quality among the offspring, and when they have a fight amongst themselves, that difference is revealed. Right, so the parents would, under that model, the parents would be setting up a competition, and they're trying to identify a defective offspring. That's a great idea, and it probably applies to some bird species, but a detail here that you haven't heard is that they hatch at about a 5-day interval, which is the longest of any bird species, so it's super long. And the first one has been growing and developing motor skills the whole time the second one is trapped in the egg. So the second one is just simply overmatched by the time it hatches. And it's not because it's defective that it dies, it's because it's little. So that is probably not the explanation, although that does apply in some other birds.
The population is being relatively constant, so that there's not an increased need for resources.
So I think you're saying that the population will be more likely to be stable if they only go for one. Okay, that might be true, although I think you could criticize that also. But let's just say it's true. Why'd they lay the second egg? A backup plan is what you said. Like an insurance policy? A backup against what? Against the failure of the first one? That's, after 33 years, that's what we think the explanation is, that it's an insurance policy against a defective first egg that never hatches in the first place. And there's a lot of evidence for that. About 20% of the offspring that are produced at the end of a year are the second one after the first egg failed. So an insurance policy is certainly possible. And in the language of insurance, you would say that the siblicide is the mechanism for canceling the insurance policy when it's not needed, because the first one did hatch. Well, now here comes the second one, and we don't want the second one. We only wanted one, so this is the cancellation policy. And in Nazca Boobies, they need that insurance policy because they're terrible at hatching eggs. If you exclude cases of their nest got stepped on by a sea lion or a tide washed away the nest, none of that stuff happened. It's just everything was fine. You laid your eggs, and can you hatch your eggs? About 60% of the time they hatch their eggs. Now you go to your robin in the backyard and exclude the raccoon cases and that fell out of the tree. Everything is fine. Just hatch your eggs. It's going to be about 95%. So Nazca Boobies are super unusual in just being terrible at hatching eggs. They have a bigger need for an insurance policy. The reason siblicide is so rare is that insurance policies in birds, insurance policies are seldom taken out because they're not needed. And when they are needed, then you need a cancellation policy, and that's the siblicide. But it's all rooted in the very poor, unusually poor ability to hatch eggs. So that seems to explain, that's a great idea. That seems to explain the whole syndrome that they have that involves the siblicide. So there's aggression amongst offspring, fights to the death. There's aggression among adults that involves various things, including competition for nest sites. There's another kind of aggression I want to tell you about that is also very unusual, about as unusual as the siblicide is. And this is aggression of adults, these are two adults, against nestlings. This is about a half-grown fuzzball nestling. It's sitting on its little nest site. Those adults are not its parents. They're just adults from someplace else. They have a strong social attraction to the nestlings. And they want to find a nestling, and then they want to beat it up. The whistler is the male of the pair, and he's the one who's engaged right now. Yeesh. And the other one's the female. This is playing very badly. Let me try again. Whoa. There we go. The female is the one who's making sort of a honking sound. Wow. Okay, well, that was kind of psychedelic. That's not how it played in the previous classes. These adults are beating the tar out of this chick. And this happens all the time in this colony. And we call those adults non-parental adult visitors. They're adults who are not the parents of the nestling, and they're visiting the nestling. NAV, non-parental adult visitors. We're really interested in the causation of this behavior. And now we're getting now to the main point of what I want to talk about today, which is genetic causation of behavior, genetic underpinning of a behavioral phenotype, and and you know about that, and you've talked about how information in the genotype is encoded, transferred to the phenotype. But I don't think you've talked about genotype by environment interactions, in which the way that translation happens depends on what environment the phenotype finds itself in. If there's a dependence there, we call that a genotype by environment interaction. And we're especially interested in that possibility in this behavior here. So they're aggressive. Adults are aggressive. Nestlings are aggressive. Adults are aggressive to nestlings. We're researching the ways that individual birds differ in their tendencies to be aggressive, and we're interested in how genetics might play a part and how the environment and the genetics might interact with one another. So I think this is an extension of the material that you guys talked about with the standard view of genetics. So I'll just remind you of that standard view. You have DNA in which a lot of information is encoded about the phenotype, and it gets translated to the phenotype through RNA, translation into protein. Proteins run out and cause the phenotype to be the way it is, right? This is review, correct? Yeah. And you probably also know that while this was the standard dogma, information transfer like that, we now know that there's feedback that goes back this way in the form of epigenetic feedback, methylation, right. But basically, we're going to be talking about the fact that we have information here, it appears over here, but is the way it appears here dependent on the environment it finds itself? Here's the phenotype that gets produced after all that mechanic happens. Maybe the cuddly kitten is different in some environments than in others in its phenotype. You talked about sickle cell anemia, I think, and how it's related through natural selection to malaria as a selective influence. I'll just remind you real fast about that. If you are homozygous for the sickle cell allele, you have RBCs, red blood cells, that are not shaped like a donut. They're shaped like that. They can clog up your capillary beds, and there are some health consequences of that. So it can be bad to have the sickle allele. If you don't have the sickle allele, you're homozygous for the wild type, you have normal donutty kinds of RBCs. They flow nicely through the capillary beds. You don't have those clogging up problems. But if you're in a malarious area with no sickle allele, you have no resistance to malaria, but the sickle allele confers some resistance. Depending on whether you have one or two, you have partial or full resistance to malaria. Okay, so natural selection is affecting the frequencies of those alleles, isn't it? It's causing the frequencies to depart from Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Remember Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? That's the way that allele frequencies get transferred from one generation to the other if nothing is affecting that transmission except just flipping coins, right? So you have alleles that are common or rare. That's what the word frequency is referring to. If you only had two alleles in a system, then say one is 0.7, the other has to be 0.3 because they sum to 1. This is all review, I'm sure. In the case of the sickle allele, if you go to a malarious area of Africa and look at the frequency of that allele, it's high. People whose ancestors were in Africa 400 years ago and then moved to the New World, where malaria is not a problem. In some places of the New World, malaria is not a problem. And you look at those descendants and the frequency of the sickle allele, it's much lower, and that's a result of natural selection changing allele frequencies, violating the assumptions of the Hardy-Weinberg model. So allele frequencies can change over time. And when they change, genotype frequencies change accordingly. Natural selection is one of the things that can cause those changes. Do you remember the 4 agents of evolution? Selection is one of them. Is anyone saying anything? Rhymes with mutation? Mutation? Rhymes with grift? It's genetic drift, yeah. And the other one, migration or gene flow, whatever you called it. Right. Those are the 4 ways that you can disturb a gene pool from Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, right? Okay. I bet we just disappointed Mr. Bennett a bit by not being able to come up with those faster.
True.
Okay. Now we're at gene by environment interactions. That translation of information up to the phenotype might depend on what environment you're in. I'll give you an example from human biology, panic disorder. Panic disorder is an overreaction to a perception of danger. It's relatively common. 2.4 million Americans exhibit it. It's more common in females than in males. The expression of your genotype depends on whether you're in a stressful or a non-stressful environment. Let's look at a non-stressful environment. Everything is fine. You don't perceive a problem. And let's say you have 2 genotypes, which is in fact the case. There's the common genotype, which doesn't exhibit panic disorder, and the panic disorder genotype. Well, that difference between those genotypes cannot be seen in this environment. The common genotype thinks everything is fine and acts chill. And so does the panic disorder genotype in that environment. But now let's look at the expression in a different environment, an environment in which a threat is apparent. Both genotypes end up producing a phenotype that is responsive to the problem. And so the common genotype is alert and maybe looking for a solution to the problem. But the panic disorder genotype freaks out. You could not have predicted this outcome. You could not have understood this distribution without knowing information about both the genotype and the environment in which it's expressed. So the term for this is genotype by environment interaction. Here's another example from fruit flies, a workhorse in laboratory genetics. Some fruit flies have a genotype that causes them to be sensitive to temperature in an unusual way, and we call that the Shibari genotype. Shibari genotypes, if there's a vial of them at room temperature, you can't distinguish them from common genotypes. So at room temperature, they're active to the same degree. But if you pick up a vial of the Shibari ones and warm it up to hand temperature, they fall on their back and they're unconscious because the way they metabolize neurotransmitters between synapses is affected by temperature in them, but not in the common genotype. So the behavioral processes get shut down. You had to have, to interpret this, you had to have information on both their genotype and the environment in which it was being expressed. So now you've got some good examples of gene by environment interactions is a complication on the normal story of how your genotype gets translated into a phenotype. Let's get back to Nazca Boobies. Navs bother nestlings. It's very common. Who are the victims? Essentially, all nestlings are victims. If you get left alone by your parent, you're going to get bothered by one of these Navs. It's guaranteed. But there's variation. Some of them don't get bothered much, some get bothered a lot, and some are intermediate. There's a distribution of the degree to which you are a victim of these NAV events. Now, these NAV events are traumatic. You get beat up, you get bloodied, generally don't get killed, but it's definitely traumatic. Who are the perpetrators? Essentially, everybody. If you're an adult and you're unemployed, you're going to do this behavior. You could be unemployed because you did not breed that season, so you don't have a job. Or you tried to breed, but you failed. Eggs didn't hatch, nestling died young. For some reason, in the middle of the breeding season, when everybody else has a medium-sized chick like this, you are unemployed. If you're unemployed, you go out looking for nestlings, and you treat them badly. Now, this is not an unusual behavior. It happens to every nestling. It is perpetrated by every adult because at some point in their career, every adult is going to be unemployed. And if they're unemployed, they're going to show the behavior. So it's ubiquitous. It's not a pathology. It's a normal part of their biology. This might remind you of something that we do consider to be a pathology, which is the cycle of violence in humans. In the cycle of violence, young victims of abuse have become predisposed to doing the abusive behavior themselves much later in life when they become adults. A young individual, young human, a young Nazca Boobie, experiences abuse and trauma, like what happens in a NAV event. If this happens during a developmentally unstable period in their life, it can have the effect of organizing their future behavior. And this is thought to be mediated by especially modification of the hormone system, the endocrine system, and especially the stress response, the HPA axis. Have you talked about the HPA axis? No? Okay, well, never mind that, but it's the stress response. If this is true, and that is true, you could direct the development of your endocrine system in a permanent way that affects your behavior in stressful situations when you're an adult. And so when you're an adult, you're predisposed to doing that abuse yourself, more than you would have been if you hadn't had that organizing event when you were younger. Of course, an adult can interact as an abuser with many young animals, and so increase the frequency of the abusive behavior just by this strictly phenotypic effect, right? So by this means, this cycle can get set up. And we have plenty of evidence that this is happening in humans. Of course, child abuse happens. And when it happens, it does affect your stress response. And corticosterone, talked about corticosterone? Corticosterone is involved in the stress response, and is perturbed in adults that have had this happen to them. This is a cycle of violence in humans. Pretty well understood that most of this is solid. Now, in Nazca Boobies, they seem to have a cycle of violence also. It is true that if you are abused as a young bird, you are likely to show abusive behavior as an adult. So the cycle exists in the same way. The metabolism of corticosterone is affected in the same way as it is in humans. So basically, the human model seems to apply to Nazca Boobies. But Nazca Boobies are the only animal, besides humans, that have common child abuse type behaviors. And they're the only ones that have a cycle of violence that's been demonstrated. So why is it so unusual and appears in Nazca Boobies and in nobody else? We think it's because of siblicide. Siblicide, it turns out, is also a predictor of abusive behavior as an adult. If you were siblicidal, you experience a traumatic event, which is this fight to the death. You win that fight by jacking up your androgen hormones, things like testosterone. And we take blood samples from chicks before they fight and during the fight and after the fight, and they have really high, unpleasant levels of androgen hormones. That's how they win the fight, because it helps them to be aggressive. And that is happening apparently at a developmentally important time and is helping to organize their behavior. So let's imagine a Nazca Boobie population that doesn't have NAV behavior, and along comes siblicide, and it causes a predisposition towards that right there. Well, at that point, this can happen, and then that can happen, and the system can take off by itself. You don't need the siblicide anymore. The siblicide can sort of start the process, but it's not required for the model of the cycle of violence to perpetuate itself. Of course, the siblicide still is happening. So there are two predispositions now possible for an individual Nazca Boobie to do this nasty behavior when they're an adult. That's the behavior side. How about the genetic side? In humans, this enzyme monoamine oxidase A is an important contributor to abusive behavior in adults. MAOA, that's what we'll call it, MAOA metabolizes neurotransmitters like dopamine, which you know about, serotonin, which you know about, involved in the stress response, involved in a feeling of well-being. And if you have competent MAOA, you're good at degrading those those neurotransmitters when you're supposed to. If you don't have competent enzyme, you can't do that. And your mood is affected, your interaction with people is affected, your ways of trying to seek satisfaction never are successful because you don't have sort of ups and downs in your feeling of well-being because you can't modulate these neurotransmitters. So these people who have incompetent MAOA are a minority of people, and the reason for that is that selection acts against them. They're not good at interacting with other folks. They do a lot of arson. They do a lot of exhibitionism. They end up in jail. They end up dead at a young age and so don't have babies to which they pass on their alleles. So we're at low frequency in the human population of low competence MAOA, but it keeps on arising. Mutation, for example, is an agent of evolution. It can increase the frequency of the incompetent MAOA. All right. MAOA is an example of a gene by environment interaction. It predisposes you to do things like child abuse, but more so in a stressful situation than in a non-stressful situation. So in a non-stressful situation, it can be difficult to identify people who have incompetent MAOA. It's in the stressful situations, when they perceive stress, that the difference really shows up. So here's the general understanding. You're under stress. If you have competent MAOA, you can de-stress yourself. You have competent MAOA when you have a lot of the enzyme running around. If you have defective MAOA, you experience stress. You don't have a good way to modulate the dopamine and serotonin part of it, and so you don't de-stress, and you go off and do something inappropriate, like beat up some child. You can have defective MAOA that's not quite so bad as I want to go burn something down every time I feel bad. You can have somewhat incompetent MAOA, and in the popular conception, this is called the warrior gene. People who are CEOs, people who are NFL linebackers tend to have a higher than expected frequency of this slightly incompetent MAOA. It confers on them a lot of aggression, confidence, being willing to offend people to get their way. Not so much that you end up in jail, but in some venues it can cause you to be successful. So you can find a place on the web that will genotype you and tell you if you've got the warrior gene or not. So back to Nazca Boobies. We've got a rare, an unprecedented model of the human cycle of violence. It's a lot more common in Nazca Boobies to see the equivalent of child abuse than it is in humans. So we've got this non-human model on which you might be able to use research approaches that you can't do with humans. So that's a valuable thing. If you're interested in genotype environment interactions, the first place you would go is this MAOA system, which is known to be a genotype environment interaction in humans. The difference between the genotypes is mostly expressed in stressful situations. We know in chickens that a similar polymorphism in the promoter region for the MAOA locus, You know what I'm talking about? Promoter region. A similar polymorphism is found in chickens as is found in humans. And there's another bird that has a similar polymorphism. So we don't know yet whether boobies have this same polymorphism, but we expect them to because it is found in such distantly related creatures like humans and chickens. And if they do, they may help, that polymorphism may help explain why some adults are frequent offenders and others are not so frequent offenders. Because you might have a double dose of an incompetent MAOA locus and whatever degree of victimization you had when you were young. In that case of a double whammy, you might be more predisposed to doing this behavior when you're adult. Whereas if you had competent MAOA, maybe you're less disposed, even if you had a history of being a victim. So that's the research direction that we're going by sequencing the MAOA promoter region of high offender NAVs and low offender NAVs. And with a long-term study and banding, you know what their history was, so you can incorporate that into the analysis also. So this was about genotype by environment interactions. It was about the genetics of behavior. And I think that's the end of my story. So we have about 5 minutes, which is good. If you have any questions or contributions or something wasn't clear. Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, would it be possible for like one Nazca Boobie somehow slip through the cracks somehow, like kind of somehow like miss the fight to the death and are protected by a parent? Is it possible for that to happen? And if it is, like, what's the status of the
Right. So you would like to have some birds that become adult and their history includes no siblicide and no victimization. And then you'd like to know what their NAV performance is like. And we would also. And we did an experiment some years ago where we would put fences around nestlings that were designated as experimental. And we were going to stop them from having NAV events happen to them. So from the time they first started being left alone by their parents, we would watch them all the time. And as soon as they were unguarded, we'd run out there with this big fence and put it around. And the NAVs would come and look in, but they couldn't get in. And the nestling learned this pretty quickly. And we had, I think, 20 nestlings that were in the protected group. And those 20, after a week or so of being protected, the NAVs would show up, and those little nestlings would just yell at the NAVs. And they would jump up and down and be all aggressive. And the NAVs would be trying to get in, they'd be furious, but so they were protected. And one of the things we found out was that if you are unprotected and you go take a blood sample and ask about their corticosterone, it goes up when you get beat up. No surprise there. But our protected birds never had those spikes in corticosterone. So the assumptions for disturbing your endocrine system during a developmentally unstable state, those were met by those measurements. So now we want to know, how about those nestlings when they come back as adults? And let's see, well, it takes forever for them to come back. They go away for 5, 6, 7 years. And so just about now, they're starting to come back. So just about now, we can start to ask whether those nestlings behave, well, now they're adults, whether they behave different. So that was a great idea. Unfortunately, it takes a really long time to ask the question. So I don't have the answer yet. But we predict that those ones that didn't have siblicide and were protected should show a very low incidence of the NAV behavior.
So what's the selective disadvantage of raising twos?
That's a great question, and you should be asking that. We have forced some parents to try to raise two by stopping the siblicide. Your nestling product from raising 2 chicks is crappy, so they don't do a good job of producing grandchildren, and you die a lot if you have to raise 2 chicks. So you put those 2 together, it's definitely better to go for just one. That is a great question.
Dr. Dave Anderson.